Boom. There we are, recording this video again. Because the first time I forgot to record the audio and I didn't want to get shitty audio for the video. And there goes the monetization. That's okay. Um, Nada. As you can see in the title of this video, Poetría Challenge. It's a new type of video, new format for me. Usually on this channel, I try to just post my audiobooks or videos of me reading out loud my poetry. And in this case, uh, somewhat of the same thing. I'm going to read out some of my poetry. But this time around, I'm trying to do a weekly challenge where I just challenge myself to write a poem based on either prompts I found online or prompts I created myself. So, being that this video will come out on the 6th of July, I searched for prompts online, searched for prompts on Instagram to be more specific, and I found this page called Follows Poetry. They had their July 22 prompts, and in them, there were like 10. And being that this will come out again on the 6th of July, I picked the 6th prompt out of their 10. The prompt was the following: pick a dictionary, open it to a random page, and then pick the third word off of that page and write a poem inspired by that word. Um, for my case, the word was purity. And before reading the poem, there was a immediate thought that came to my mind when it came to the word purity. I didn't mention it earlier, but I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I'm a podcaster. Sometimes I can be a content creator, but for the most part, I consider myself a writer, podcaster, documentarian, because my podcast is mostly about documenting the independent arts in Puerto Rico. But I guess you would consider this content creation to some extent, what I'm doing right now. So I guess I'm a content creator now? I don't know. Anyways, aside from all that, I'm also a teacher. And when the word purity came as the word for this prompt, for this challenge, I immediately thought of my students and their setting. The school where I teach, the environment around it challenges their purity often. It is a community that has been basically forgotten by its municipality, and either the one, there's two municipalities because the community is like right in between both towns. So there are two municipalities, both of them kind of have forgotten of the community. So it challenges my students' purity quite often, as the community is filled with poverty, it's filled with violence of all sorts. So their purity is often challenged, no? Can they maintain said purity in such an environment where gang violence exists, drugs exist, poverty is at an all-time high, their politicians, their so-called leaders have forgotten about them, basically. So the word purity immediately made me think of my students. For a moment, I thought maybe write a poem inspired by my sobrinitos, my nieces, my nephews. But since the immediate thought was my students, I just thought, let's do this for them, or inspired by them. So I wrote this poem inspired by my experience as a teacher in that community. And this is what came out. The poem is called Purity, just like the word that inspired it. And it goes like this: where they live, purity is often lost due to multiple forms of violence. I can't do much except give them an education that can help them escape that violence for a life that'll allow them and their loved ones a better life. Purity, purity, purity. You have very little space in those streets. But I hope you'll still exist, because everybody deserves a childhood. And that's the poem right there. Not very long. Usually my poems are kind of like that. They're pretty short. Um, so, as I mentioned, inspired by my experience as a teacher, I just put on my teacher's hat and reflected on what I try to do every day. I'm an English teacher, so yes, I try to help them in learning how to communicate in English. But being as I try to learn a lot about my students, their likes, dislikes, their interests, I try to adapt my class to all of that. So even though they're in ninth and 10th grade, I know that a lot of them are business oriented. They want to grow their own business or, you know, try to work in small businesses or what have you. So I try to integrate that into my class in whatever way I can. So not only do they get interested in my class, which they already kind of hate because they don't feel confident enough when they're trying to learn English. So I try to get them interested, but also to try to give them extra tools, because sure, communicating in English is fine and dandy, but uh, a lot of times, most of them they just want to stay in Puerto Rico, so they don't want to really go out to the United States or whatever. So I try to give them additional tools, be it how to make a resume, how to get organized. Because if you want to be an adult and you want to be a business owner, you gotta get organized. So I try to show them how to make their own agendas. Try to get them to get organized. Try to help them to make their own resumes, even though they're still very young. Regardless, that's the point. I try to help them how to communicate in English, written and spoken way. But I also try to give them tools that'll help them out in regular life, Uh, so the poem was inspired by that. How can I help them get tools? How can I help them work on things that'll eventually help them out in the real world when they're no longer in, school? Um, be it in school, college, or even if they're already working by the time they graduate high school. So, the word was purity, but it led to all this. Talking about my experience as a teacher and a little bit about the creative process, which really wasn't that much. I just found the word and I just started writing, which is what I try to tell a lot of people in my immediate circle or just people in general. Like, do not let this classic way of being an artist of like, oh, I'll just wait for the muses to come and inspire me to write a poem. No, sometimes you have to write a poem just cause. It's not gonna be perfect at all, cause nothing is perfect. De una, on first instance, that poem by all means, while I find it to be very good, it wasn't perfect. It could have been longer, could have been shorter. Other people's eyes when reading it might tell me otherwise. So what was I saying? No, yeah. A lot of times we let ourselves just wait for the music to come by and not do anything, and we never achieve anything that we have on our bucket list of goals or bucket list of creative projects that we have in mind, because we just don't do anything. And if there's something that I've learned across the years is that you can't do that. For me, as a writer, as a poet, as a podcaster, in the early morning, sometimes from 6 to 10 or 7 to 11, those are my best times to be creative. So, I just hop on my computer, open my Google Docs or my Microsoft Word or whatever, and I just write. Write. Añoetría, the project that I'm doing across multiple platforms where I write a poem each day for an entire year is a way for me to continue that practice. I have to write at least 12 poems, 12, something somewhere around that range. 9 to 12, something like that. I have to write 9 to 12 poems each and every day so I can post them each and every day on their respective platforms. So I can't wait for the muses to come to me. I just have to look at the word that I put for said date and write a poem inspired by that. So that's what kind of happened for this, you know? I just looked for a prompt, found it thanks to False Poetry on Instagram, and I just wrote the poem, you know? Sure, it is a struggle at first, but with practice, you'll get better at it. And again, as I mentioned, don't wait for a perfect poem or a perfect piece of art in the first instance. You know, you just gotta learn to simply just do it, let go, let it be. Editing is a part of the creative process, so you can do that afterwards, no? So, yeah, if you're struggling to be creative right now, I would just tell you to do that. Just write, draw, doodle, paint, do whatever you gotta do. But just let go of perfection and do something, you know? And that's part of where this idea came up, you know, the Poetría challenge. Challenge myself to write a poem, talk about the creative process behind it, and post the video up online as soon as possible. So, yeah, if you like this video, like it. If you dislike it. Subscribe if you like. Check out my audiobooks. Check out my books on Amazon, Bandcamp, Spotify, whatever. Links are in the description. And yeah, thank you, False Poetry, for the prompt. Next week, most likely the poem is going to be related to climate change in some way, shape, or form. Still don't know. I gotta check out the prompts that I wrote down in order to get inspired. So, yeah, have a good one, guys. Thank you for watching.